Hello and welcome to Masala Podcast. I am super excited to have with me someone whose work I've been following for a couple of months. She's incredibly young and incredibly successful. I can't wait for you to hear all the amazing things she's doing. Avantika, welcome to Masala Podcast.
Thank you so much, Sangeeta. Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
So I'm looking at Avantika on Zoom and she's like flown in from New York, but she looks amazing as she always does,
Thank
like
you.
fresh faced as anything. Um, Avantika, let's start at the beginning.
Okay.
Because I know your family moved from Hyderabad, is it, to San
Yeah.
Francisco? And is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
where you grew up?
Yeah. I grew up in and around San Francisco, so like the Bay Area. And yeah.
Yeah. And what was that like?
So we actually moved from San Francisco to Hyderabad, and then I spent 4 years in Hyderabad, and then we came back, um, which was very interesting because my parents always raised me very traditionally Indian, not in like a very conservative way, but in the sense that culture was very like it
Yeah.
was very
Yeah.
relevant in our home, and so I was like I learned Telugu, which is my native tongue, and I can speak it fluently, and it was very interesting to experience all of that in America amidst like a school that was like had a lot of Asian kids, but nobody was necessarily, that into their culture, I guess. And so it was interesting to grow up like that and then move to a place where it was so relevant and it was
Yeah.
there all around me. And I felt that after I'd come back from India, I felt so much more grounded and so much more comfortable being myself and like wearing things like wearing a bindi when I had felt uncomfortable before.
Yeah.
So the shift for me was not that negative. It was quite positive, actually. I think being uprooted from that environment I was in was very beneficial for me.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, from what you're saying, did you have like a sense of belonging quite early on? It sounds like you did.
I struggled with belonging a lot because the school that I went to in California was a very like hardcore academic prep school, and a lot of kids there were struggling with the fact that their interests were not necessarily academic, but they were in this school that really
Yeah.
reinforced academic rigor. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of their parents were privy to the fact that these kids were having this mental struggle and frankly did not care. And so a lot of these kids were forced to kind of take up academic pathways, which there's nothing wrong with it, but just as long as you're not being forced to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my parents were always very open from a young age. Like I took care of the academic side and did really well in school, and they kind of let me explore like other options as a kid. Like I was allowed to do like horse riding or anything that
Yeah.
I wanted to
Yeah.
learn, like I
Yeah.
was allowed to. And so I think I struggled a lot in that school because people saw me as like an anomaly, as someone who was able to do both, or more better phrased, like somebody who was given better opportunities by their parents. And so people were very like exclusionary and they were very mean to me
Wow.
in school, which is like an interesting thing, right? It's like I was given
Yeah.
a privilege, and like to be kind of like shunned because of that privilege is quite interesting. It's a very interesting concept that I've only experienced in that setting. Um,
Yeah.
but after I'd come out from that school, I was homeschooled for 4 years, and that was very helpful because I was like left to my own devices and I was allowed to kind of grow on my own.
Mm.
So I think that kind of change was also really, really, really great for me.
It's so incredible hearing you speak. Yeah, you'd think that if you were among kind of kids who were like you and came
Yeah,
from the same background, that it wouldn't be as bad as, say, going to a school full of white kids who didn't really understand your culture. Here
right,
you are surrounded by other people like you, but they
right.
have a problem with you because you're allowed to do stuff they're not allowed to do.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insane, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I have a lot of sympathy for those people
Yeah,
because like I see them now and they're all like still on those career paths that their parents put them on when they
yeah,
were 9, 10.
yeah,
And so like I get where the kind of
yeah.
like disdain for me comes from. But I think the best case for what was good for me instead of like sitting there disliking my environment was to just leave, which is what I did. But yeah. Yeah.
No, that's hard. And I guess a lot of times this kind of stuff comes from resentment. They
Yeah,
can't have what you have, and then they act out against you. It's really
correct.
sad, but I guess it's kind of human behavior, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you started your career in Telugu films, am I
Yes.
right?
Yes, you're right.
And what age was that when you moved back to India to pursue that career?
10. I was 10 years old.
10. And do you remember what it felt like when you arrived from America into that world?
Yeah, it felt kind of, I think when I landed in it, I was up until that point, I was visiting every year. So it wasn't like India was this foreign place for
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
But I remember like walking when I first went to India, the first film that I was set to do tentatively
Mm.
was a film where I was with two other kids and we were shooting in a rural village. And it was very with this very big named actor. And I kind of wasn't exposed to a film set directly. Like this was a very homely experience of like rehearsing in a
Yeah,
village and doing like a lot of workshopping and like
yeah.
bonding with these kids. So I feel that I was personally like eased into it. It wasn't like thrown at me.
Mm.
And I didn't end up doing the film for like complicated reasons, but I had done these workshops for like almost close to a month. And so that was like, I guess, kind of my introduction into like how the film business works. And I, after that, had transitioned to a movie, which was very glamorous, very high budget, like lots of glitz and glamour. And so that I think was like my big shock of like, oh, whoa, like this is actually like
Yeah,
kind of insane. Of like, and like I remember Shah Rukh Khan had visited that set. So it was like really crazy to like see
yeah,
him person like within
yeah.
like my first few months in India. I was like, oh my God. I was like,
God, I've
I
made
like it.
it.
I was like, I like it here. So it was very, very like it was very cool to kind of also get like not to say that the first film was an indie, but the director really like
Mm.
shot it like an indie and he prepped us all like it was an indie movie. So to like in my first few months to get a glimpse into what it was like to be in a more indie, like more artistic environment versus a more commercial like blockbuster environment, it was very like it was a lot for me and I loved it. Like I loved taking in a lot and processing a lot. So it made me really happy and it kind of cemented the fact that I like would like to spend a long time in this industry.
Yeah, yeah. And then a couple of years down the line, you moved back into Hollywood, right? You kind of decided
Right.
to do that. How
Right.
did that happen?
So when I was in India, like the original reason why I decided to pursue a career in India was because at the time there were just not very many opportunities for
Mm.
people in like Indian people in America, and it just wasn't realistic to ask my parents to move to LA for something
Yeah.
that I had just taken up, and like I didn't really see much chance for me to succeed. But when I was living in India, Disney had sent out an audition for this movie called Spin, and it's crazy because like back then they did like a whole worldwide search, whereas now like realistically they would only search within the US because there's
Yeah.
actually so many more actors for them to pick from. But at the time, which is like, I'm going to say around 4 years ago, there was not very many people. So they were even exploring people with an Indian accent and like willing to put them through dialect training. So I had received an audition for this, and this was my first American audition ever. And I auditioned for it, and I watched that audition back now, and like it's genuinely like it's like a Colgate commercial. I'm like cheesing the entire time. It's like kind of crazy that they had actually been like, okay, great, we'll give you a call back. And they had also added as a note, but she requires some coaching, so we'll put her through the process, whatnot. And so they had asked for me to come to LA, and I was like, oh my God, absolutely, like it's my dream to be in a Disney movie, I'll come to LA. So I came to LA, and right at that point in time my roles in India had started fizzling out because until that point of time, for that 4 years, I was hired as like to play like the childhood version of whichever heroine was being cast in a movie. So I was getting a lot of job opportunities, but it was very limited to like a certain age category.
Yeah.
So I was like sensing that maybe I would have to come back to India like in a few years when I was like a little bit more matured and I could audition for those heroine roles, but now is not the time. And when I came to LA, like I think it really struck me that like I love it here, and it Hollywood was a place that at the time, again, India has now improved very much so in evolving from just a very glamorous kind of industry. But Hollywood to me seemed like a place where I could do character work. And the fact that they had put me through coaching was something that I
Yeah.
loved. I was like, oh my God, like I can learn, and like it was crazy to me and I loved it. And so my parents and I contemplated like moving to LA for a year. They gave me a year to be like, you can have a year to prove yourself. And if not, we're shipping you back to San
Yeah.
Francisco,
Yeah.
and then you can pursue whatever you want after you're 18. But that year went surprisingly well, and India roles, I kind of like wrapped them up. But yeah, that was like kind of Spin's audition, which the film ended up being shelved and it came out a few years later again. That was kind of like my trigger to be like, let me pursue a career in LA.
So kind of between moving back and when Spin finally happened, was there a period of like, I want to be an actor and I'm trying to find work? Was there a period at all like that?
Between
Sort of
Spin.
moving, yeah, between moving and then Spin came
Yeah.
out a couple of years later, right? Was
Oh
there,
yeah, for sure. I
yeah,
mean, when I first came to LA, like my then agent had said to me and my mom, like, you're looking at minimum 3 years before she sees any work. And
mm.
my mom and I were like, oh my God. We were
Yeah,
like,
that's a lot.
we put a 1 year timeline. Like we
Yeah,
were like 1 year, and
yeah,
we had given ourselves 1 year, and said like,
yeah,
need to like get it done in a year.
yeah.
And I trained every day. I was like working my ass off. And in that year, like obviously a lot of this stuff is like confidential, so I can't say anything, but
So between kind of moving from India to back to Hollywood and kind of starting this career, I'm guessing there were a few years when you were looking for roles or looking for jobs. I think my question is like, what was it like? Did you find any barriers to a young brown woman trying to find work in Hollywood at that time?
so I think within those, like I was looking at about 2.5 years before I saw any like what before, let me put it this way, before there was any work that the public saw, not
Yeah,
any work that I had been in. So it
yeah,
was so when my parents had said like, you get a year to prove yourself, you get a year to give it your best shot. Even though in that year there was nothing that the public saw, I was doing better than my
yeah,
agent had expected originally of me. I was screen testing for a lot of big shows like
yeah,
High School Musical and like The Walking Dead. Like there was a
yeah,
lot of projects that I was screen testing for and in the top two or top
yeah,
three for.
yeah,
And for me, that was like encouragement enough, regardless, because like whoever booked it, there was a valid reason why they booked it.
yeah,
But it was very encouraging to me to be like, okay, like people are actually giving me a shot. You know what I
mm,
mean? Like if once you make it that far, it's really not about your ethnicity, or it's not about, I personally don't think so.
yeah,
Obviously, everything's hypothetical,
yeah,
but to me, it felt like the industry was changing and it was changing for better.
yeah.
I definitely see so many more opportunities now than I
Mm.
did back then. But I would say I came at a time when the industry was pivoting and the industry was changing. So I was seeing those barriers crumble, and I was seeing, people like Mindy Kaling and people like
Mm.
really amazing South Asian pioneers in the industry,
Mm.
like breaking down these barriers. I wasn't really seeing them in action, which I think I'm incredibly privileged and grateful to say. But personally, that was like my experience.
That's wonderful. It's so, so good to hear because, like you're saying, I guess a lot of the others paved the way
Right,
for you to
exactly.
then come in and kind of get these roles, which makes me really, really happy to hear. So let's talk about Spin. So this, you were the first ever Indian American lead of a Disney original film, Spin. Wow. How did that change your life? I'm sure it did. And how did that come about? How did that change your life?
So the audition had come back 2 years later, and I was in the room again, which was very, very exciting for me to, like re-audition for this film that had kind of like propelled my journey in LA. And they ended up telling me in the room that I had booked it, and it was very exciting to me. It was like my first big role, and it was like my first role where they were like, you're gonna prep, you're gonna like learn how to DJ, and it was
Yeah.
very, very exciting for me. um I think it's crazy. I think an experience like that is just I'm really glad to have had it so early on in my life, and it set off so many things for my career. It set off so many, it cemented the fact that I could act in a film and that I could shoulder a movie. And so I think so many other films have trusted me on the basis of that film. So, even though like Spin is just like about this normal, like it isn't this hardcore Oscar winning drama, it was enough for me, and it was enough for, people to see that I could do this. And I think for that, I'm really, really grateful to Spin. And the movie introduced me to a whole community of South Asian artists in this industry that I had not known before. And so I'm really grateful for that as well. Like, it's given me a sense of community. It's given me kind of a home in Disney, which, like, again, comes to relevance like a little bit down the line in my career. But like, it truly, like, such a magical experience to have, like, when you're so young. I'm very grateful for it.
Absolutely. And then you went on to do the Netflix film with Rebel Wilson, senior year, right?
Yeah.
And playing this cheerleading captain. Now with both of these roles, right? Whether it was with Spin, where you're this DJ, right? And with senior year, you're this kind of cheerleading captain, that they're unusual roles for brown girls, right?
Yeah.
And I think you made this point in an interview, I think, and I thought that as well when I was looking at your work, that isn't it so important for South Asian girls to see these, let's say, unusual paths rather than the usual STEM, doctor, engineer, lawyer?
Yeah, it is.
Right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Because I think it comes down to the fact of, like, like, again, like I was saying, back in my childhood, like, it was this very abnormal thing for someone who is brown to, have freedom to explore all of these different facets of her personality. And I think it's important for parents to see these kinds of movies and kids to see these kinds of movies so they can tell their parents and tell their, like, I think it's important for families to consume these kinds of movies so that, like, subconsciously they kind of understand that we're not, like, as an ethnic group, limited to this and this. And the thing is, this isn't really personally, like I see so many people in India who pursue, like, singing and who pursue arts as a career. But the reason why, like, Indian Americans specifically as a niche, or like Indian immigrants for that matter, I'm sure it's the same in the UK. Like, it comes from a need of, like, survival and a need of, like, survival of the fittest. So it's like STEM is reliable. And so let's do that. But now that opportunities are opening up, like, other fields are becoming more reliable and more stable as well. And so I think it's important for parents to watch, like, films like this and understand that it's not as risky anymore. It is still risky, but not as risky. And so I, like, have consciously tried to do roles like this personally, but I'm not at a stage where I can just, like, take my pick of the litter and pick and choose. But I'm really grateful that people have given me these opportunities because, for example, for senior year, the casting call was put out for an any ethnicity character. And so most of the roles that are coming up in the future for me are any ethnicity parts that I've ended up booking, and they've altered to kind of align a little bit more with my culture. So I'm so happy that the industry is, like, willing to do that and willing to make that change. I think it's really, really inspiring, personally.
That is like music, isn't it? To listen to you say that you kind of apply for a role that's like any ethnicity, and then that is tweaked to fit you. I think that's amazing. Gosh, I had no idea it was that progressive. It makes me really, really happy.
Cool. Yeah.
Actually. Did you I'm guessing from the little that you've told me about kind of your family and the way, they were in school, that I guess you never had that kind of pressure to be the traditional STEM girl. Did you ever have that? Either from your family or extended family, or?
Yeah, so never from my nuclear family, I would say, like, never from my mom and my dad, because I think they had that trust in me. But that being said, like, extended families, obviously, like, they don't live with me. They don't know who I am to the level that my parents do. And they've always had opinions on the fact that my parents sent me into this industry. So no one ever, like, explicitly was like, you have to be good at academics, but the fact of like the repeated questions to my parents of like, is she still doing well? It says like the concern with like the way that they let me kind of explore this was enough to like pressure me into being like, you should never let like this side of you like die, and you should never let this side of you completely crumble. Which I respect. Now, like I'm really happy. Like being in this industry, I see that an academic background is also very, very helpful, and it kind of maps out your way intellectually. And now that I'm kind of really interested in the business side of the industry as well, it's helpful to have this background. But was there pressure? 100%. I think there's always pressure, but I don't think that pressure is bad. As long as the pressure is not debilitating, I don't think it's bad to like push someone to be better, push someone to kind of fulfill their potential.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I guess as long as the pressure is, hey, have you thought about this? That's different. Just saying, if you don't do this, we will stop loving you.
Right, exactly.
They're very different choices, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, some South Asian kids get that latter, that's all they get. So it's not their fault that they've got no other choice but to go down that road, whether that's something they want or not, I guess that's really, really sad. So something I loved about your pictures and all your Instagram kind of pictures from the last, and I've been kind of stalking your Instagram.
Please do. I love it.
Your saris. So you wear this absolutely beautiful gold and black sari, I think a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I love it. And I think there's another couple of pictures where you're wearing the sari and you wear the bindi all the time. I love that.
Yeah.
Now, what I wanted to talk to you about is like, I love saris, right? I've got like 20 odd saris. I love wearing them. I did a podcast live where I wore a sari, and everybody would come up to you and say, "Oh, you wear a sari? That's yeah, that's cool." And that's the subtext is like, well,
that's so interesting. So yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So my point is that isn't it, and it's more of kind of a talking point rather than asking a question, that isn't it sad that it's some sort of weird racism towards ourselves that we don't even allow ourselves to enjoy our own culture?
Oh yeah, I agree like 100%. I think society's kind of like judgments regarding this thing like deprive us of fully. I don't think any kid prefers, like I personally will refuse to believe any kid enjoys eating chicken nuggets more than like hot roti and like you're telling me you enjoy like the bland ass chicken nuggets from the school cafeteria more. I really strongly believe that it's just like this reinforcement that it's weird has like allowed like give it, and it's just so messed up. And I think it's crazy to me that people are like, it's, and I think certain people have like kind of almost decided that it's empowering in a way, and I think that's our way of like coping with the fact that we are not allowed to like bring this part of our heritage. But regardless of what like people's way of coping with that deprivation is, it's like really messed up that society and like countries where diversity is so large, like in America, like there's people from everywhere, so it's crazy to me that melting pots like this are like the first country to be like, that's kind of weird, like that's interesting. But yeah, it is very sad.
And even like I feel like that's such a loss to ourselves, right? So what are we doing? We're rejecting a part of ourselves when we're saying, I can't eat this roti, I'd rather eat the chicken nuggets. Or I'm saying, oh, I can't wear the sari, like I've got to go to this cool event and look really kind of on trend, and this is not on trend. So what am I saying? I'm saying that this part of me isn't okay, because I am that, I and generations and you and your forefathers and foremothers have all come from this place,
right?
And I find that intensely sad, I think, and I hope, like you're doing, it's such a joy to be on your Instagram page and see you with your little bindi wherever you are, and it suits you. You look amazing with it, and your hair, and you're like this proper South Indian girl. Like, you look it. You've got this absolute look. and you're owning it. And I think it's absolutely gorgeous.
Thank-
So it makes me very happy. I sound like your proud auntie or something,
I'm
but I
happy.
really, but I really feel it. I really, really feel it.
I honestly think like whatever the reasons may be, I think people are embracing it so much more. Like I'm seeing on TikTok, like all these girls who are going to like their prom in like a sari or like an Indian outfit. It makes me so happy to see that. And like I think we will come to a place where like that involvement of our culture even like graduates past aesthetics and like just look and like people will start opting to take like Hindi or whatever their native tongue is as like
Mm,
their additional language instead of like French or
yeah,
Spanish. And
yeah,
not that it's bad in any way, but it's such an important way to connect to these cultures because if enough people don't do it, they die out, and you
absolutely.
you don't want that to happen. So I think it's really great to see this kind of a progression in I think people are starting to understand that you can be both. You don't have to pick. You can
Yeah,
be
yeah,
Indian American or you can be, like I think people are understanding that you don't have to pick one or the other, which is I think really, really beautiful.
absolutely agree. And I think even with some people, I think it's the parents who choose this kind of idea of like, okay, we now live in America or the UK, and so we must now fit in. Because it's
Right,
again the survival response, right? It's like I've got to
right,
fit in and be part of this place, otherwise, I'm not going to survive. And
right.
I think they then enforce this kind of on their kids to say, okay, you don't speak Telugu or Malayalam or whatever at home, and you speak in English, and you do this, and that's I find doubly sad as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and another thing that occurred to me when we were speaking is like it's this weird co-opting of Indian culture, like bindis. The last couple of years, loads of girls in festivals were wearing bindis
Right,
without even saying, "Hey, it's an Indian thing that I've now got on my forehead." Like, you know,
right.
or chai lattes everywhere. I don't know what it's like in the States, but it's everywhere you go. There's like coconut oil and chai latte, and it just really annoys me.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, please enjoy my culture, but hey, you might want to say
yeah,
that it comes from somewhere else.
yeah.
So it's this weird co-opting. And then we've now gone as kind of, I don't know, whatever, first, second generation South Asians to say, hey, now we're being cool and drinking the chai latte and eating putting coconut oil in our food. It's this weird
Yeah.
kind of circle. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but just,
No,
it's,
no, no, no. You are. And I think it's a way of just like I have a bit of a like I think an interesting I don't know. I personally like I don't my take on cultural like appropriation is very much so that like I give a little bit more lenience in the
mm,
sense of like I think not everybody who can wander around can like outwardly state that they know
mm,
what the backstory and know what the
mm,
history
mm,
appreciation is. And I think that a lot of people from the South Asian community like also really don't know like what the background is of any.
mm,
I think we
yeah,
can afford other people if they're able to do it respectfully the same kind of
yeah,
I think a lot of things can be considered cultural appreciation. That being said, chai lattes is like horrendous. I'm like they're not good. You're not doing it right. I'm like if you do it right it's a different question, you know what I mean? It's
yes,
if you do
yes,
it right it's appreciation.
yes,
If you don't do it right it's not. It's
yeah,
like it's
yeah,
gone past appropriation. It's like
yeah,
butchering
yes,
chai. And I think the same thing like applies to like bindis at festivals. I think the reason people were so agitated by it was because it was being done in loads and loads. And
mm,
there's no way this many
yeah,
people
yeah,
gave attention to what the bindi actually is
yeah,
and what it actually means. And
yeah,
like so many people, like if I knew girls who wore bindis to school and stopped wearing it after 2 days because of the fact that people were making fun of them. Like I went to a
mm,
public school for a certain point in time and it was not
mm,
okay. So
mm,
I think people get triggered by stuff like that, which I think is
yeah,
completely valid. But I think brown people like going and drinking these chai lattes and calling like haldi doodh golden milk, like
yeah,
that like this is like our way of like
yeah,
reclaiming
yes,
this almost like Americanized take on our culture and being like,
yeah,
hey, we're like the actual people who came
yeah,
up with this. This
yeah,
is us.
yeah,
We're
yeah,
allowed to participate in this, and you don't get to hate on us for it. But yeah,
yeah. I guess what you're saying is to be a little bit gentler with it, right?
right, right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah. gentler with the people who, gentler with the brown people who are buying a chai latte when, I think somebody would be like, why can't you just like, you should know how to make it on your own. And,
Yeah, yeah,
you shouldn't be like involved in all of this, and to be a little bit gentler on even the, like white people who might be drinking a chai latte, you know what I mean? Like to be a little bit kinder and a little bit more
yeah,
like
yeah.
with everyone, I
I like
think.
that. I like
Yeah.
that. So, Avantika, you seem very connected to your culture. You are clearly you speak Telugu and you kind of lived in India and your I mean it sounds so cliched, but with your saris and your bindis and your kind of way of being, you're very, very connected. What does it mean to you to be South Asian? Like what is this connection for you? What does it feel like, smell like, taste like?
I think being South Asian is like has given me this really, I mean, there's so many different factors, and I think it's this really cool sense of community and this really, I think for a person who struggled with their identity and for with who they were for so long, being South Asian was like a baseline for that. You know what I mean? Like speaking Telugu and wearing a bindi and knowing that this bindi meant certain things to my mom and my grandma, and this is why I wore that bindi, and having curly hair, and like my grandma, like when she came to our house in America, and she would like stitch like wreaths of jasmine from like the jasmine trees in our house, like jasmine vines in our house, like those are all such fundamental like core parts of my identity, and they kind of, and that was a given, like embracing that was a given. And so it gave me kind of this sense of belonging when I was struggling to find any. And now, like, I think every aspect of my identity has been able to build off of that, because I already walk with a confidence of like, I know who I am to an extent, and I'm figuring out the rest of it as I go. But it's kind of redirected this sense of like being lost that I felt when I was really, really young. And like, learning Kathak and learning Kuchipudi, like these were things that I learned as I was growing up, along with ballet and along with jazz. But it all kind of like cemented a very good foundation for me. And I think being South Asian is carrying like centuries of really amazing culture and really amazing traditions. And being South Asian in the modern world is like making those your own and taking the cultures and traditions you want, because there's no way you can uphold all of them in the
No.
current day. Some of them just don't fit, but a
Yeah.
lot of them are so moldable. And I think that's what's really beautiful about culture like this. It's timeless in a sense if you give it the space to be. So I think, overall that's what, being
Yeah.
South.
It's so good for me to hear you. Um, and you're a young woman and you've kind of grown up in these cultures. And what I find with you and a lot of other sort of American South Asian guests I've interviewed, you know, the pain of it isn't so much for you because I think where, say, older generations, it's been a choice. Either you kind of seek this path or you're an independent person.
Correct.
So there's a pain involved where you have to give something up.
Yes.
And then you've got to be your own woman, particularly for women. And with you, I think because there's been space for you to be who you are,
Right.
that process has been a lot more seamless. And so
Yes.
your
Yes.
kind of embracing of the culture is so organic and so beautiful without the angst. I think
Yeah.
that's what I'm getting at. Like
Yeah.
people like me, there's been a lot of angst and
Right.
a lot of kind of, I don't know what it was like for your mom or any other women. So speaking to you and hearing this from you is a real joy. And it feels like you've taken the bits that suit you from the
Yes.
culture that work for you as the woman you are now in this world in 2023.
Right.
And you're not necessarily saying everything belongs to me. You're saying, okay, I like this. I like wearing my bindi, so I'm going to wear a bindi, but I might not like why, so I'm not going to do it.
Right.
And that I think is really, really lovely to hear.
Yeah. And I give that credit a lot to my parents, because, like this is like a constant thing, right? Like, where do you draw the line? What do you conform to traditionally? And what do you say this is not going to work for me, right? And your parents are obviously going to have different opinions on what you should culturally conform to. And you're going to have different opinions about what works for you. And my parents, like, always kept like an open-ended discussion. I'm not saying that they just like let me do whatever I want, but like even yesterday, my mom and I were having a discussion of me being like, like this is what I think it means to, raise my kid like culturally Hindu or culturally Indian. And she was like, no, I think this also needs to be a part of it. And I was like, I don't believe that. And the fact that she kept the discussion like open-ended and let me have that, like work through that with her, it kind of created a very healthy environment for me to not grow resentment towards my culture and not completely hate it, and to see that I can pick things that I like and that I love and keep those in my life without having to take everything.
No, absolutely. Um, just to give you context, like for someone like me, I grew up in India in the 80s, very, very traditional family. So I was the first girl in my family to go to university, to have a job. They were trying to get
Nice.
me married off when I was about like 19. So I was like, I'm not having any of that. So it was literally a walking away from my kind of heritage. I'm
Right.
like, I reject all of this because you're not letting me be the person I am. And it's only now that I'm much, much older that I've been able to go back to it to say, hey, hang on a minute. Not all of this is evil.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
I love this bit and I love this other bit, and I'm choosing this and choosing that. So that's
Right.
what I mean. I don't know if that gives you any context
Oh
because
yeah. Yeah.
otherwise
Yeah.
it makes
100,
no sense.
100%. I agree. I agree. And I think it's like people like you who have gone through both sides of the equation, like seeing the beauty and being able to pick everything you love and understanding that you don't need to take everything. I think it's people like you who will raise like kids who are able to like appreciate and see the beauty in certain aspects of their culture without hating all of it. But yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So you're going to be a star and the star and producer of A Crown of Wishes,
Yes,
which is
correct.
a fantastic new Disney film by Roshni Chokshi. Is that right?
Yes, yes, she's the author of the book that
She's
we
the author of the
are
book.
adapting. Correct.
And you are, remind me how old again?
When I optioned it,
Yeah.
I was 16.
So you're 16 and you're going to produce a film. I mean, how cool is that? How
Right, right.
absolutely cool is that?
Yeah.
And this new Disney princess is a different sort of Disney princess, isn't she?
Right.
Tell us a little bit more about her.
So I was 16 when I optioned it, and I'm 18 now. So it's been 2 years. So I've had like 2 years of time with these books, and Roshni Chokshi did like a phenomenal job of developing this universe of which this trilogy of books takes place in. But she's a really cool princess in the sense that she's very in touch with her strength, and she's very in touch with her power, and she's not afraid to be unlikable, but she's not unlikable, which I love. I love that. I love
Yeah.
characters who are like are not afraid to be unlikable, but
Yeah.
they're still somehow like they still connect to you as an audience, because
Yeah.
we do need to see unlikable characters, but it's very hard
Yes.
to watch them.
Yes.
So it's very important to me to have, because this is a character that like young girls are going to watch, and I want them to love her. I don't want them to hate her and see that like, oh, I don't like her, I can't stand her. I want them to enjoy her presence, and I want them to see her as like their big sister. But she's, you know, fearless, and she's so strong, and she's incredible, and she's uplifting of other women, and
Yeah.
she's this just really amazing character in this world of like ancient India, which I think again like reinforces the fact that progressive ideals can exist in this seemingly traditional world, because I personally like pre-colonial rule, pre like British invasion, like this is what India was like. And so I think they set us back for long ways. And I think this series is kind of meant to bring back like what India was like really in its like in it's almost like in its prime, or in its
Yes.
ideal situation,
Yes.
and how women were really allowed to explore themselves. And so there's so many characters other than her. There's a character named Asha, who's this amazing queer, like beautiful Vishakanya, and she's like an assassin come dancer. Like she's really, really cool. And so I think this show is filled with a lot of amazing female characters, one for everyone. Like if you don't particularly relate to Gauri, like I'm sure there's someone you're
Yeah.
bound to like
Yeah.
find yourself within.
I love that. First of all, a Disney princess who is brown, who's South
Yeah.
Asian. I mean, that in itself is like revolution, because we've all grown up with like blonde, blue-eyed Disney princesses. So
Right.
that is amazing. And to me, it makes me so happy that like this whole generation of young brown girls are going to grow up and watch someone like that on screen. And that's
Yes.
going to be their idol. And I think that's super, super exciting.
Yes.
And I think the other thing you've touched upon, which is she may not be the most likable character.
Yeah.
And that is really, really important, I think, because we are taught that as women, our first role is to be likable, is to kind
Correct.
of please other people, to
Correct.
be like pliant and to be smiling and to be pretty and to be all of these things. And young girls growing up, all of us internalize these ideas that to
Yeah.
exist in the world as a girl, I have to be all of these things. I have to get people to like me most of all,
Right. Right.
right?
Yes.
And to challenge that assumption for a young girl, I think is super, super important and
Yes.
quite, again, revolutionary, I think, because I don't think I've seen any characters like that.
Correct. And I think there's something that needs to be broken with young girls understanding that there's a difference between what society teaches us are characteristics of women who are liked versus women who are liked or women who are loved, because I have so many female friends that I adore and that I love who don't comply with these
Yeah.
characteristics that we think of when we think of a likable woman, because it's simply not true. We as humans are just not that, like, or at least let me say women, because I can't speak to men, and I would hope that this is like aimed to target young girls. And so
Yeah.
we as women like see past like somebody for just being like demure and being or whatever, like societally like established characteristics are. We love them for so much more. And so I think girls understanding that they can be themselves and still be loved, which is where that like fear of being unlikable, like it doesn't come from like, oh, let me just be a mean bitch because I think I can get away with it. It's
Yeah.
more from like, let me not limit myself to this and understand that I can still be loved. Like there's so much more people love you for than you just being these like 3 or 4 characteristics: pretty, not taking up space, smiling when somebody says something mean to you. Like you can be loved for so much more than just holding back. And I think that's the beauty of Gauri and the beauty of her, because you fall in love with her despite her breaking all of these kind of traditions.
No, that is super, super powerful. And, there's so much, I think, if we dig deep into how the world socializes young girls to be a particular way.
Right.
And the problem with that is it's not just young girls. Then girls grow up into women and women, become older women. And we're carrying those things into our lives.
Yes.
And that affects everything from
Yes.
the choice of job to career to whether you speak up in a meeting or, whether the value you ascribe to looks more than anything else, because
Yeah.
that's what you've been taught as a young child.
Right.
So I think it's super, super, super important. So I love the sound of Gory and I love the sound of this film and I cannot wait for it to come out. I
Me
think
too.
it's
I'm
going to be
really
amazing.
excited. We're in development right now, so it's very exciting. Obviously the Writers Guild is on strike, so everything's
Yeah.
taking a pause, but
Yeah.
I think that's for the better. I think like industry changes with things like this, and they're very necessary. But
Yeah.
hopefully after things are able to be settled with them, we can get back into development. But it's been really, really exciting.
Amazing. My God, I am so impressed by you. You are 18 years old and you're producing and developing a film, and you've done like all these insane big roles with like these big banners and, things like that. What I was going to say to you is like, if you do so much so young, do you think about where you will go from here?
I think there's so much more that I can like
Mm, mm,
do. And I
mm,
think that's something that I've dealt with my whole life, is like imposter syndrome in a sense, because
mm.
there's always going to be somebody who's like your age, who's better, is doing more,
Yeah,
is accomplishing more. And so I can always look
yeah,
at them and be like, but that's where I could be. And that's
yeah,
where I could have been if I maybe changed this or changed that.
yeah,
But I'm learning to take that in a more positive sense of like, there's nowhere to go but like up from here. Like, there's so much more left to explore in the world. And I think that is like, let me never feel too comfortable in a place, which
Yeah.
personally I like. But yeah, I think there's so much more, like so many more things I want to produce, so many more things I want to act in, so many more stories I want to tell, so many people I want to meet. Like I think there's just lots and lots to do. So I'm never scared of that ever. I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. Great. Let's talk about Mean Girls.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
So, you're going to be one of the leading stars in this production. It was a Broadway show, wasn't it? And now it's going to be a film. Is that
Yes.
right? So tell me about Mean Girls.
Um, I like just got back, so like when I was
Mm,
in New York for it. So I've just we like wrapped like a week ago. But it's been like insane. I think the past three projects that I've done, it was basically I was shooting a horror film, and that was like for Sony, and it was this really dark, like intense horror. And then after that, I ended up shooting like a drama series for Amazon. And so to get off of both of those and come on to like a musical that's so fun and eccentric and like it's just colorful and vivid was like a really big change for me mentally. But my directors were amazing. They were so good. And I think people are really scared of this movie because they're everyone's quoting Mean Girls 2, and they're like, we don't want it to turn out like Mean Girls 2. But I think what people are forgetting is that Tina was not involved on Mean Girls 2, and she was there every day on set for this film, and she really guided this project and put her heart into it. And our choreographer Kyle and our directors Art and Sam, everyone was just like so involved, so amazing. People poured their heart into this movie, and I could feel that every day on set. And it was such an amazing experience to sing for the first time in a movie, because I had only been a shower singer up until that point. And so to sing for the first time in a movie was really amazing. To dance, I had grown up being a dancer. So this was my first musical film back from Bollywood. So that was really, really amazing. And to dive into this character, which is just so iconic and so funny, and she's ditzy, but she's kind, and she's like I love Karen. I love Karen, and she's always been my favorite character from Mean Girls. And so to be able to like play her now is kind of surreal, and I hope people like my take on her. I'm very nervous about this, but I hope people are like happy with what I've done. But yeah.
I'm sure they will love you. I mean, they've loved you in everything else, and I cannot see how they wouldn't, right? So tell me this. Um, when other young South Asian girls, brown girls sitting in the US, in India, in the UK, everywhere else see you on screen, see you on their TV screens and all of that, what do you think it does for them?
I hope it does for them what it does for me when I watch shows like when I watched like I just went and watched Polite Society in theaters, and it was amazing. Like I loved it. I think it was like I don't think a film like that has ever been done before. And I am going back today to like take my parents and watch it with them. But I hope that seeing me on TV does what that did for me, which is like fill me with a sense of like hope, and fill me with a sense of
Mm,
with a renewed love for cinema and a renewed love for storytellers, particularly because I think when we stop seeing people that we relate to, and we stop seeing people that feel like us, we get bored, and we can kind of fall into this like very monotonous pace. But
mm,
I think my goal is to like renew people with the sense of like,
yeah.
oh my God, like this is something we can do, or like maybe this inspires me to watch more cinema and watch more movies and like
Mm,
get back into that. But like to be entertained and to be feel seen and to feel heard, I think is what my goal is, hopefully.
amazing. So let's think for a moment. We've got Avantika sitting here, who's like, I don't know, 4 years old, 5 years old, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And we've got Avantika sitting here, who's 18. What would you say to her?
Um,
Maybe when you were in that school, the one you were telling me about.
Mhm. I struggled, like, I think that was like my peak of like imposter syndrome. And so I think that was like the biggest thing that was plaguing me. It was like
Mm,
I don't feel like I'm worthy or talented enough to be successful in the film
mm,
industry, and I don't feel like I'm smart enough to succeed in like in STEM. Yeah, I was succeeding in school, but I didn't think that made me like qualified enough to be a neurosurgeon. And so I think what I would tell that Avanti is to like be confident in the fact that you'll find your own intersection of both of those, and you don't need to be like 200% good in either of them. You need to find like your niche. And if you feel like an imposter in the room that you're currently in, leave, like find your own room, make your own room. And I think that I've begun to do that. And I would tell her that, like, you're on the path of doing that. So, like, trust in that and trust in the fact that there are people around you who will guide you into finding your own space, but focus more on that rather than fitting into whatever space the world has decided to force you into.
that's beautiful. You've spoken a little bit about imposter syndrome, right? And I know every single creative person that I know has it.
Yeah.
Like it's just such a part of this dialogue, right? What do we do or what do we say to ourselves? What have you found that's useful when that voice kicks in?
I think that what comes with imposter syndrome is like it's not the imposter syndrome itself. It's never like the complex or the syndrome itself, that like it's the pain that comes with it. And I've always reminded myself that that pain, as like stupid as it sounds, it like there's been so much trauma that this is the only way to cope with it, is to remind yourself that it's so human to like feel these things, and that that's a blessing in and of itself, is to feel like it's like, oh, I feel like an imposter, but I'm feeling something. Like, I've been in states of depression where I've felt nothing and I felt numb. So feeling something, feel, even if it's a complicated feeling, has been really beneficial to me, because I'm like, okay, at least I'm feeling something, and
Mm.
at least I'm processing this emotion in a healthy way. So that's what I tell myself when I feel like an imposter. I'm like, you're in the thick of being human, and that's really, really cool. And this is just an experience, and this is something that you'll grow out of, because I've grown out of everything that I've like badly experienced, even though at the time I thought that I would never be able to. So I know that I'll grow out of this, and it'll happen at some point for me. And until that point, I'm like enjoying being complicated and enjoying having like weird feelings and complicated feelings until that point.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. What else has been complicated? I mean, like if someone say looks at your Instagram or looks at your kind of various credits for films, you're like, oh wow, amazing life, and it's all going so well. Have there been any challenges along the way?
I mean, there's been a lot of challenges, and I think it has to do mostly with like my battle with my culture and my family versus like the career that I'm in. So like even down to like the things that I wear in my films are like a topic of discussion. It's like, oh, is this appropriate? And I have to speak on the fact that this is like my career, this is my job, and like certain things are suitable for a character that I may not wear in real life, but like I can't face judgment for choosing to wear in that, because that's me doing a good job, as this is me like doing my job as an actor, is to, if a certain clothing type fits a character, to like wear that. And so there's been so much of like, even when it comes down to producing, like, are my ideas worth it? Am I bringing enough to the table? Because at the end of the day, I'm adapting something from a book that's already been written. So finding value in my take and finding value in my spin that I put on it
Mm.
has been like an ongoing battle as well. Like finding value in my own voice and not just feeling like I'm
Yeah,
this person who's doing a job, which is
yeah,
what I'm doing. But I also need to understand that I bring something to it,
yes,
and
yes,
I still don't think I fully comprehended that, even though I'm saying it out loud.
yeah,
So that has been an ongoing battle. And, it doesn't help when, like, when like extended family doesn't really see it as a job. Like when everyone asks like, what are your future plans? Like, oh, you want to continue being, you want to do this? And I'm like, well, it's a job. Like, I make good money. Like
I'm very successful.
I
Yeah.
like work really hard, and like I may
Yeah.
not be like a superstar, but like I'm a working actor, and like I
Yeah.
would hope that there's this level of respect given to it. So, fighting with that and like hoping that my parents are still proud of me throughout all of that. There's just been a lot. And so I think that applies to anybody. I think successful or unsuccessful, there's just always a lot going behind the scenes, and that's what's fueling us to keep going on in life, I think.
I guess that's being human, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is.
There's always stuff to navigate and kind of go through.
Yeah.
You mentioned depression. Is that something that you've suffered from in the past?
I was very young when I was like, it was during my period in India where I was, it was the first year was actually really great, but I think after that, like I had started to realize like I have no friends. Like I work with adults every day and I don't go to school. I don't have friends. And when I'm not working, I'm just sitting at home because I don't have friends. And I feel like no one really understands me. And I was like going through things about identity, and I was going through all these like questions and left to nothing but my own devices. And there were a lot of things happening like within my surroundings as well that propelled that. But I got out of it, and I think that's all that really matters.
Yes.
And I know now how to keep myself like away from that, which is I also think matters very much. You need to like learn. You need to learn from experiences like that. But I sympathize with anybody who's experienced that, because it's tough, like not being wanting to get out of your bed and like shower. And I think nobody takes it seriously when like a 13-year-old has depression. They're like, you think you're depressed, but like even now as an 18-year-old, I know I've never been that sad and been that numb in my life. So like if anything, like I hope 13-year-old self knows that like older Avantika understands that it's painful, and that it'll be over very soon.
Yeah. And in many ways, actually, it's harder when you're that age because you haven't got the tools.
Correct.
Like 18-year-old Avantika will have a lot more tools at her disposal than 13-year-old Avantika, right?
Right.
It's in many ways it's harder. So well done for kind of finding your way out of it. And it sounds like you did. And you've got this, I think, incredibly successful career. I'm like so impressed with you.
Thank you. I appreciate
can't stop saying it. Like I don't know you, but I feel really proud of you, of the woman you are. I think it's amazing for me to hear and watch you.
Thank you so much.
So before we leave, have you got any words or advice for listeners of Masala Podcast?
I'm assuming bulk of the people who listen to Masala Podcast are South Asian. So
Women,
I'm gonna say yes, South Asian women. So I'm gonna say that, while it may feel that our culture is against us as women, there's a lot of things that it has to offer, and to use those to your benefit and to use those to fuel whatever path you want to be on for the future, because you have a lot to offer. Your narrative fused with this narrative of like centuries and centuries of history and culture is really powerful, and to like never forget that, and always use it to pave your way in whatever field that you choose to be in.
That's wonderful. That is very, very wise. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Avantika, for being on Masala Podcast. It's been an absolute joy and
thank you so much.
It's been an absolute joy to
talk to you too as well.
Thank you.